This time it's Nashville, Tennessee. I'm here with Bruce. I'm going to let him explain the story.
All right, so we have Mark's Mile here. This is a bourbon that we produced, I guess within the last year, really. This is something that is a collaboration. It took a lot of people to get together to make it happen. This is listed as a 3-year bourbon. This bourbon actually has some older whiskey blended in with it. The laws, they've changed a little bit in the last couple of years, but one thing we like to tell people is the way U.S. law works, you can have 50 barrels of 10-year-old bourbon and 1 drop of 3-year-old bourbon, and when you mix them together, your bottle is a 3-year-old bottle. But in this case, again, we've got a delicious whiskey, and we've enjoyed putting it together and enjoyed getting this relationship underway.
And thanks to Bruce, he was patient and worked with the rabbi to make it certified kosher also.
That's right.
And people are loving it, and you can get it in the stores in Brooklyn. You know where to reach me. And we're going to do now some barrel sampling, and Bruce is going to explain history of whiskey.
Okay, well, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
So before I was a distiller, like a lot of people in distilling, I was a home brewer, a winemaker, cider maker, mead maker. I've been making alcohol for fun for most of my life, but this is my second career. My first career was as a forensic scientist. So I ran a DNA testing lab here in Nashville. I worked in human identity testing, that is forensic testing, parentage testing. But the whole time that I did that, I was making alcohol for fun. And in 2013, I decided to take it from fun to
make other people have a good time.
That's right. So for the last 8 years, I have developed my distillation abilities. Before that, I was doing fermentation, so beers and wines only. And we've been doing distillation now for 8 years. And I teach distillation, and I teach the history of fermentation and distillation. So I just want to take a quick minute to talk about what's happening when you make alcohol. Sugar, water, and yeast are the 3 critical elements to make any kind of alcoholic beverage. In wine, you can see that the sugar comes from fruit, the water comes from fruit, and the yeast is actually on the surface of the fruit. You can add special yeast if you want. You can let yeast that's in the air get in there. But sugar, water, and yeast, when they get together, the yeast eats the sugar and produces ethanol, which is that right there, and carbon dioxide. People have been making wine for at least 9,000 years, and it can be as simple as crushing fruit and letting nature take its course. That won't necessarily get you the best wine. We've learned a lot of things, especially in the last few hundred years since the science of microbiology has developed, but those are the basics. Whiskey is a little different. Whiskey is made from grain. It is essentially a distilled or concentrated version of a beer. And grain is full of starch molecules, which are chains of sugar, specifically glucose. And there's an element of fermenting grain that you don't have with fermenting fruit, and that is what we call mashing. Mashing is the process where the starch in the grain is converted to sugar, which essentially means the chemical bonds holding those chains together are broken, and it depends on an enzyme called amylase, which is created in the grain by soaking it in water. That's called malting. And without getting into too much detail, in the mash cooker, we add grain, we add water, we add heat, take it through a series of temperatures, which allows the starch to convert to sugar. We add yeast, transfer it to a fermenter. It usually ferments in our distillery for 3 to 6 days, at which point we have what's called distiller's beer. That distiller's beer is going to be boiled in a still, and the process of boiling that beer allows the alcohol to vaporize at a faster rate than the water, and you end up condensing that vapor back into a liquid, and you've turned beer into whiskey.
Wow. So that's why whiskey has higher alcohol than wine, because it's just sweeter, the grains?
It's not that it's sweeter, it's that a wine or a beer can be concentrated through distillation into a spirit. If you distill a wine, we normally call that spirit brandy. If you distill a beer, that spirit might be whiskey. It can be other things. It can become the base for a gin, it can become vodka. There are a lot of different things, but whiskey is always distilled beer, and brandy is always distilled wine.
This is so amazing because people always ask questions. You are so clear and explaining it. For you, it sounds so simple.
Well, I appreciate that, but I've spent 30 plus years
to condense this.
Doing this. And yes, and certainly in the last 5.5, 6 years as we've operated the distillery, I do give a lot of tours and present this information daily, so it is kind of pretty well rehearsed. And I also, as I said, I do distilling workshops. If anybody wants to come down and spend 2 days with us, we usually spend the first Tuesday and Wednesday of the month. whenever we can fit it in, doing a hands-on workshop. We only take a few people at a time, but we
I
teach them.
would love to come down when we do Mark Smile, the next round.
Happy to do it.
Whoa, I didn't know that. Definitely coming down. So this is the next step.
Yeah, so here what we've done is we have gone through the mashing process, which is where the starch in the grain is converted into sugar. And again, that's the result of a portion of that grain having been sprouted in the process called malting, has an enzyme in it. We converted it to sugar, and now fermentation is going on. So if I move this out of the way, you'll see the bubbling that's happening underneath here.
It's warm? Yeah.
It is generating heat. This is probably about 12 degrees warmer than it was when we started this. This is 48 hours into fermentation. If I were to test this now, it would probably show that it's about 7 or 8% alcohol.
So it's almost like beer.
It is. We call it distiller's beer. Some people call it wash, W-A-S-H, but distiller's beer, in case of making bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, traditionally has the grain solids in it still. We don't remove them the way you would for a Scottish or an Irish whiskey. Or a better way to say it is in Scottish and Irish whiskey, you strain the sweet liquid called wort away from the grain solids. In this case, we're going to let this ferment for 3 to 5 days, and we're going to take this, transfer it into the still, and we're going to boil that beer, remove about 25% of the vapor, condense that vapor back into the liquid, and that becomes the whiskey.
But do you ever stop and you make a little batch beer for yourself?
Not in this case, although in a pinch, you could just scoop some out and drink it.
Can I taste it?
We can get a sample cup for you. I'll bring one over. You can have a taste for sure.
So by the way, every Saturday morning when we go to shul,
Yep.
to synagogue, after that we drink whiskey. It's usually a celebration. Somebody had a baby.
Sure.
So we always drink it in these little glasses.
Yes.
It's called a blessing cup. They call it like,
Yeah.
it's like you make
Yeah.
a blessing on.
It's called the blessing cup.
In the Christian world, they call it a communion cup.
Communion cup?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Move this out of the way so you don't get so much solid.
I'm gonna make a blessing.
All right.
It's good.
I think it's good.
I don't even think it's like a food also.
It almost tastes like a cereal.
Yeah?
It's like grits, cream of wheat. It's like a hot cereal,
Exactly.
except that it has sugar in it, and that sugar is being
So it's
converted
the
to alcohol.
perfect breakfast for me.
All right, so here we are. Once fermentation is complete, we talked about fermentation a minute ago. After 3 to 5 days, the distiller's beer will be about 10% alcohol. So it's like a very strong beer or like a moderately strong wine. And we're going to pump it from the fermenter into the still. This is an inlet port over here. So we hook a hose up here, hook a hose up to the fermenter, fill the still, and then we're going to turn the heat on. In older times, the still would have been heated by a fire. You just have a fire underneath it. Our fire is in our boiler room, and it produces steam, and the steam is what heats this up. So I'm going to come back here real quickly, turn the steam on, and you'll hear steam circulating through the bottom here. That's called a steam jacket. If I open this valve, you can see it coming out of there.
That's all steam?
That's steam.
Wow.
And that's going to heat the beer up until the beer reaches its boiling point. When you
Okay.
boil a beer or a wine, beer and wine are mostly water, right?
Yeah.
Water, then alcohol, then some other chemicals. Water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Alcohol boils around 173 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you boil a beer or a wine, it boils somewhere between those 2 points. In this case, it's going to boil at 195 degrees Fahrenheit. When it boils, the vapor that's being produced from this 10% liquid will be 75% alcohol. So 10% alcohol liquid boils, it gives us a vapor that's 75%. It goes up across the steel tube at the top into the condenser, which forces it to cool below its
So
boiling
it's
point.
actually the vapor, that's what that turns into the whiskey.
That's it. It's like you make a cloud
And what
of whiskey.
happens with the other 70% of the water that gets like
What's
burned
left
off?
behind
Yeah.
goes to a farm and is fed to livestock.
Oh, nice.
And that keeps it out of the waste stream. We don't pollute anything.
And
It's free food for the farmer, and they give us free transportation to get it out of here. So we don't sell it to them. No money is exchanged.
But it's nice.
just a collaboration, yeah. So we take that. The portion that we distill is going to be redistilled. It becomes the whiskey. In a minute, I'll show you what it looks like after one distillation. It looks kind of green and cloudy and maybe like you wouldn't want to drink it. And when you distill it the second time, then it becomes this beautiful, clear
so
spirit.
the more you distill it, the finer the drink tastes?
Yes, to a degree. You do not want to distill it too much because you will lose the character. So there's a balance.
It become like air almost.
Yes, actually what it becomes like is vodka. Vodka is distilled all the way to 190 proof. But whiskey, American whiskey, is usually distilled at or below 160
Because
proof.
you want the flavor.
Have to have the flavor. So by law, we cannot distill a bourbon or a Tennessee whiskey above 80% alcohol or 160 proof.
Beautiful.
All right. So what we have here is the distillate, and we're going to block ourselves a little bit, but this spirit has been distilled.
Oh, this is strong.
Yeah, so this is the whiskey. It's got a little bit of a green color to it. It's got a little bit of a haze to it. The first time through the still. We're going to take this whiskey, put it back in the still, and redistill it again. At this point, it is about 35% alcohol. When we have redistilled it, it will be 75% alcohol. But you'll see when we've distilled it a second time that it's going to have sort of a brighter, cleaner aroma to it, and it will not have the oiliness, and it will not have that green color. The green.
Oh, you have it ready to...
Oh yeah, we've got a tank of it ready to go, so we can take a look at that. But if we measure this, we'd see it's about 35% alcohol at this stage. Mm-hmm. When we distill the whiskey and any other spirit, you have to separate it into fractions that are called heads, hearts, and tails. This tank is 3 tanks in one. The first part of the spirit you don't drink. It is initially poisonous, and it tastes bad. The middle part of the spirit is the good part that you drink, and then the part at the end, which is called tails, has a musty taste and an oily consistency. So heads and tails are not
What do you do with the head and tail?
They are actually redistilled. There's a portion of the head that has to be removed, but most of them are redistilled. The heart becomes the whiskey that ends up in the barrel and eventually in the bottle.
Very nice.
Heads, hearts, tails. All right? This is the whiskey having been distilled 2 times, and I'm going to bounce this a couple times so you can smell it.
Yeah.
And then you can see it in there.
Smells delicious. It's clear.
Yes.
It's a whole new story.
Yes, exactly. This has been refined. You can call it rectified. That whiskey right now is about 145 proof, so 77.5% alcohol. It has been through the charcoal filtration process.
Ah, it's already been through barrels?
Yes, so not barrels. This is our whiskey as it came out of the still. We put it up there so that we can gravity feed it through this, which we use as our charcoal filtration filter. So this barrel has been modified so that I have valves at the top and bottom, and it's been filled to about here with charcoal. And I'll go ahead and open this valve.
So this is your own, you came up with this idea, or this is something that a lot of distillers do?
There are many ways to make a charcoal filter. We've done filters out of glass before. You can make them out of steel.
I love this.
The very big distilleries use large wooden vats that they fill with charcoal. So this is kind of like a small version of this. We only put 100 gallons through at a time, and it takes about 5 hours for that 100 gallons to make its way through.
And why do you do the charcoal? It's for the smell, for the taste?
Charcoal is going to make the spirit, you can say smoother. Some people say it takes some of the rough edges off of it. But charcoal is carbon, and carbon is going to chemically remove some of the harshness of the young whiskey.
Why? It's a difference if you do it after or while?
Well, the law says that you have to charcoal filter before barreling. You can charcoal filter after barreling if you want. Jack Daniel's has a product called Gentleman Jack, which they do it before and after. But most Tennessee whiskeys are just charcoal filtered prior to barreling and aging.
So this is the charcoal wood?
Well, these are the inside of the barrels. The barrels themselves are also charred. So the word char shows up twice in Tennessee whiskey. You have to pass the whiskey through charcoal like this.
Oh, wow.
And that's what's in this barrel here. And you also have to put the whiskey in a charred barrel. Now notice that after the whiskey passes through the charcoal, it is still colorless.
Yeah,
so it's totally,
yeah.
So the char does not give it any color. When you have a charred oak barrel like this, it is not the black layer of charred wood that colors the whiskey. It is a brown layer below the charred
that gives the
layer.
color.
Right. It's almost like a piece of toast that you burned. If you scrape the burned part off, you get the brown part.
So it sits so long in the barrel, then it gets the color.
Yes, and the color of bourbon or Tennessee whiskey that we're familiar with, you would not get that color from a barrel made of American white oak, because the barrel doesn't have that much color in it. It's actually the burning or charring of the barrel that gives us the characteristic color that we get from that whiskey. And it only works once.
Interesting.
So new charred oak is one of the requirements for bourbon and Tennessee whiskey.
This is very expensive.
You use it once and then you sell the barrel for another purpose. And
how much is a new barrel?
Well, for us right now, we pay about $250 for a new barrel.
Okay. American oak?
American white oak, charred.
White oak.
and then that gets sold on to other industries. Most American barrels end up in Scotland. We were talking about Scotch
yeah.
before, or Ireland. Some
Or
of
now
them,
tequila.
tequila, they end up in the Caribbean for rum production. They end up in Canada for Canadian whiskey. But in America, our primary whiskeys, bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, and also rye, are all made in new charred oak. So we use them one time and then they go on for another purpose. This is a bottle of spirit. This is actually one of my sorghum spirits that is aged the same as the bourbon, same amount of time, but this is a new barrel and this is a used barrel, just to give you an idea. And I know you've seen lots of Scotch and Irish whiskey. It's often closer to this color. Bourbon and Tennessee whiskey is almost always this color.
Because they use new oak.
That's it.
Interesting. I'm excited.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and drill a couple holes in this real quickly and pull a sample.
That's how you pull sample?
I'm gonna drill one high so that we can have a vent here to let air in. Yeah, you can use a power drill, but it's kind of fun. This is called a bit brace. This one was probably made in the 40s or 50s. And like a lot of old tools, it's better than the new ones. You can find these on eBay, garage sales, things like that. But these tools last a really long time. We like to use them, and if you have some leverage like I do here, it actually doesn't take very long. It never runs out of batteries.
So it's not filled up till the top.
It is at first, but then it evaporates. Now there's gonna be whiskey that's gonna come out here in a second.
And how do you fill the holes up?
We've got a little
Plugger?
spiral peg called a spile. A little conical peg, I should say.
Smell it already.
And then get another one ready.
Really interesting. I think it's enough
That's good.
for now.
Yep, there we go.
It smells delicious.
And this is at barrel proof now. So for this, it's probably about 120 proof.
Okay.
So considerably stronger than in the bottle. But what we'd like to do is taste it at full strength, just a little bit of it.
Woo! I can feel that it's cast strength,
Yep.
but it's. I think it should be a little softer. No. It tastes delicious.
Yeah, it's got
but
sweetness, it's got
but
spice.
The alcohol is too high.
120 proof is not for everybody or for every spirit. So we have a little water.
You dilute it.
Yep.
Yeah, we've done some cast strengths. So what happens now when I dilute it with water?
Well, now you've taken it down from about 120 proof to about 100.
Which is almost a normal whiskey.
Yeah. I think we do 94 is probably the most common proof that we do. We don't chill filter our whiskey. And if you do non-chill filtered whiskey at less than about 93, 94 proof, it hazes, which isn't bad for the flavor, but the consumer doesn't understand what it is usually, and they think there's something wrong with it. So we sell the whiskey at 94 or higher. Mm-hmm. So we've enjoyed having you here visiting the distillery today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Nashville, and we get to see you sometime soon.
I loved it, and I'm coming back to help you to make the next batch, Mark Smile.
Excellent.
And if you want a little taste of Mark Smile, gotta walk a mile in my shoes. Follow me, we'll get you a bottle. L'chaim.